It appears that in just 2 days' time, former President Donald Trump will have an official opponent for the Republican presidential nomination. Nikki Haley on Wednesday has a special announcement event scheduled in her home state of South Carolina. She is expected to officially announce her candidacy for president. The 51-year-old previously served as governor of South Carolina and in the Trump administration as ambassador to the United Nations. She already has plans to hold events in the critical states of Iowa and New Hampshire. Meanwhile, New Hampshire Republican Governor Chris Sununu has made it clear that he is considering jumping in the race, too. He gave an example of what his campaign might look like yesterday on Face the Nation.
A lot of opportunity to change things, right? I think New Hampshire has this awesome model of live free or die, limited government, local control, individual responsibility, really putting the voters first. Send them some money, which is nice, but send them the regulatory authority, too. So a little decentralizing out of Washington and maybe a little better attitude would be a good thing for America.
Joining me now are two of my CBS News colleagues, our political director, Finn Gomez, and political reporter, Aaron Navarro. So, Finn, I want to start with you because obviously we covered the Trump administration together. Hello.
Yes.
And Nikki Haley.
Yeah.
This is kind of like an on-again, off-again relationship.
Right.
I mean, back in 2016, she's like, I don't want anything to do with Trump.
Marco Rubio.
Then she joined his administration.
Right.
Then she left and said, oh, I'm not going to get in the way if he runs again. And here we are today. So what does she have going for her that could help her compete with Trump and, DeSantis and a long list of others?
Well, I think make no mistake. I think Nikki Haley starts off as an underdog here. Clearly, as you mentioned, both Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis are the two names that are dominating the picture right now as it stands. However, there are some people within the Republican Party who believe her experience, the fact that she was the former South Carolina governor, the fact she was the former U.S. ambassador to the UN under Trump, and her experience plus the fact that she is a woman of color in a field that may evolve to be one where she might be the uniquely different than the rest of the potential field. I think it stands out, especially at a time when the Republican Party is waging this culture war, if you will. Her background as both the child of immigrants and as a woman of color has a certain experience that could define her and her candidacy, her likely candidacy, but also, frankly, the fact that she shares has very similar platforms to both Trump and DeSantis also gives the opportunity to appeal to that base that is being that both DeSantis and Trump are going after.
Is that base ready to elect a woman of color?
I think that's a great question, and I'm sure that's an obstacle that she has perhaps to overcome in certain of these early voting, early primary states. But the fact of the matter is that the clamor around her and her potential candidacy is a real thing, even though in most polling it shows her in a distant third, fourth, or even fifth. And I think, but the fact of the matter is that a lot of these potential candidates, potential hopefuls, they're almost like political stock. And right now there are those who are investing in that stock behind Nikki Haley. For the fact of the matter is they believe that she may be able to rise.
And Aaron, I want to turn to you because Finn was already talking about Ron DeSantis. Everybody's talking about Ron DeSantis when we're talking about 2024, and he has had some pretty significant legislative wins in his state. He also made a name for himself, leading Florida during the pandemic. So I wonder how you think he's going to use that as he launches his own campaign for 2024.
Yeah, so this legislative session is just another way for him to add to his conservative resume. On his agenda for March through May, when this session occurs, concealed carry, 6-week abortion ban, some measures related to education, both when it comes to raising teacher pay, as well as what he calls, fighting against the quote-unquote indoctrination in schools. It's a way for him to add to his long list of what he sees as Republican wins, and that gives him more, helpful things to say to voters in Iowa and New Hampshire, and a case to make that he can apply those same policies nationwide, these policies that are very popular with the Republican base. But what this session also does for him is it gives him a little bit of a buffer. So he can consistently say, when asked about 2024, that he's focused on governing in Florida. He's not thinking about 2024, and continue to save money, reach out to donors, while Nikki Haley and anyone else that really gets into this this race can start to duke it out with President Trump and maybe weaken him a little bit before DeSantis is expected to get in when this legislative session ends, which is on May 5th.
So do you think that he'll announce his run shortly after that?
Everything I've heard from people that support him, some advisors in his orbit, suggest that after this legislative session is when he could start to get in. Now, they know it could be fluid. That could be a little bit after that, closer to June. But everything has pointed to at least an exploratory committee of sorts around that May, early summer timeline.
And I want to ask you specifically about Disney, because obviously that is like, you know, a crown jewel of the state of Florida, and it creates so many jobs. But DeSantis has gone after Disney, which is rare for a Republican to attack private businesses in general, especially one that brings in so much revenue for his state. So talk to me about, you know, why he has some beef with Disney and how that could impact his candidacy.
So this all stems from an education bill called the Stop Woke Act, which deals with the teaching of sexuality when it comes to students from kindergarten through the 3rd grade. This was something he passed in 2021, and he has gone after Disney for what he says is promoting a woke political agenda. And he actually saw somewhat of a win last week in that space when, in a special session, the legislature passed a bill that he's expected to sign that essentially will give him oversight on this special district that Disney is in. So DeSantis may have some more, say in what Disney does, some of the tax exemptions they get. And in regards to how that plays into his potential 2024 campaign, it gives him another point to say that he's more of a populist, that he does not bend to big companies, that he's trying to stop, their quote-unquote woke agendas, what he often says. And that's something that he is on a long list of him in terms of battles he's taken that he can highlight and talk about on a potential 2024 campaign.
We've seen DeSantis really lean into the culture wars. We saw during the State of the Union, Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders really do the same thing. But New Hampshire Governor Sununu actually said on Face the Nation that he doesn't think that is effective. He wants to focus on policy. He wants to focus on real issues that he says people care about. Do you think that has a winning chance, Finn, given, where we are right now in the culture wars? It's, a lot of Republicans do want to talk about wokeness and their rejection of it. So do you think Sununu is making the right call here? And what reporting do you have about, the fact that he might jump in for real?
I think it's a really serious consideration. He is a popular governor in an early voting state. Obviously, the Granite State, New Hampshire, is one that a lot of Republicans covet for a win, right? And so I think that he does have that as a factor. But the narrative past New Hampshire for Sununu, where is that? Where's the lane past New Hampshire? Can he do well in South Carolina? Can he do well in Florida? Yes, it's early, but where does he go? Where does that potential candidacy go? And that's a real question that he has to ask. But he is getting a lot of attention. For the fact of the matter, he's not afraid to engage fellow governors like Ron DeSantis, and unlike Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who I thought during her Republican response sounded a lot more like DeSantis, frankly, than Donald Trump. I think that he's trying to make something of a unique voice in that northeastern state. And but again, where does he go past that? He's also someone who has a pro-abortion rights position in the Republican Party where it's rare. So again, he has this lane. There's others in it too. Potentially Larry Hogan from Maryland, Chris Christie, the former New Jersey governor, and someone who supported Trump. There's all these people who might jump in that same lane.
Yes, it sounds like it's going to be a very crowded, chaotic field that we look forward to covering. Finn Gomez and Aaron Navarro, thank you both for your time.